12 Most Dangerous Criminals. Hey guys, and welcome to this channel. On this channel, we give crime stories and details on gruesome murder cases. In this video, we will be talking about the top 12 most dangerous criminals that have ever existed. And before we start this, make sure to drop a like for this video and subscribe to this channel. 1. Jack the Ripper. In the fall of 1888, a serial killer is known only as Jack the Ripper terrorized the poor Whitechapel neighborhood of London. The criminal records and contemporary news articles both refer to the killer as the Whitechapel Murderer, or Leather Apron. Prostitutes working in the East End of London's slums were frequently the targets of attacks blamed on Jack the Ripper. Their throats were slashed before their bellies were mutilated. There was concern that the killer knew anatomy or surgery because at least 3 of the victims had their organs removed. The media and Scotland Yard received numerous letters from people claiming to be the killer in September and October 1888, fueling speculation that the murders were linked. 2. Jeffrey Dahmer. American serial killer and sex offender Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, killed and dismembered 17 male victims between 1978 and 1991. Later killings often included necrophilia, cannibalism, and the preservation of body parts, usually the bones. Dahmer was determined to be legally competent to stand trial despite his diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic condition. On February 17, 1992, he was found guilty of killing 16 people in Wisconsin and given 15 consecutive life sentences. After committing another murder in Ohio in 1978, Dahmer received his 16th life sentence. Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, beat Dahmer to death on November 28, 1994. 3. Donald Henry Gaskins. Gaskins has claimed responsibility for the deaths of 80 to 90 persons, many of whom he tortured and mutilated. He picked up his first victims in 1969 as a hitchhiker on the southern U.S. coast. A criminal partner of his saw him murder 2 young men and turned him in. He was given a death sentence that was eventually commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gaskins now has the distinction of being the sole person to murder a condemned prisoner. 4. Harold Shipman. It is estimated that at least 218 patients were killed by Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, but the actual number is probably closer to 250. Between 1972 and 1998, this doctor murdered patients at 2 separate clinics in London. It was raised when an undertaker noticed that Shipman had signed off on a large number of cremation certificates, and that most of the victims were elderly women who had been found dead in bed during the day rather than at night. The police botched the case, and Shipman continued killing until he became greedy and sought to forge a will for one of his victims that made him the beneficiary. This raised suspicions among the victim's daughter. After being tried and convicted in 2000, he took his own life in prison in 2004. 5. Charles Manson. Charles Manson is one of the most recognizable figures in American history and one of the most notorious murderers in world history. In an effort to spark a racial conflict, the charismatic cult leader Charles Manson ordered the murders of Sharon Tate and several of her companions in the Hollywood Hills. It was the odd silences between Beatles songs that Manson thought he heard the messages in. He gave the race war the name Helter Skelter, even though the song was taken from the White Album. Strangely, there are others who think this whole thing could have been avoided if critics had been more enthusiastic about Charles Manson's music. 6. John Wayne Gacy. American serial killer and sex offender John Wayne Gacy raped, tortured, and killed at least 33 young men and boys in the Chicago suburb of Norwood Park Township, Illinois. Before his crimes were uncovered, he performed in public under the names Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, but he soon became known as the Killer Clown. All of Gacy's victims were killed at his Norwood Park Township ranch-style home. Typically, he would invite a potential victim to his house and then convince them to put on handcuffs so that he could perform a magic act for them. After raping and torturing his victim, he would either asphyxiate them or strangle them to death with a garrote. 26 bodies were in his crawl space, 3 more were buried somewhere on his property, and 4 were thrown into the Des Plaines River. 8. H Holmes. The chemist H Holmes, who converted a hotel in Chicago into a torture castle, is one of the city's most eerie serial killers. Holmes relocated to Chicago in preparation for the 1893 World's Fair, and he began installing gas lines, secret passages and trap doors, hallways leading to dead ends, chutes to the basement, soundproofed padding, and torture devices throughout a maze-like hotel. On his operating tables, Holmes would often use gas to knock out his guests before the worst of the situation occurred. He would then sell the skeletons to medical schools and conduct life insurance fraud before burning the bodies in the building's furnace. He confessed to around 30 killings before his 1896 execution when a fellow con artist turned him in for not paying up. 9. Chikatilo. More than 50 young women and children were victims of sexual assault, murder, and mutilation at the hands of Russian serial murderer Andrei Chikatilo between 1978 and 1990. Chikatilo stabbed and slashed his victims to death. One of the kids there was only 9. Chikatilo much later admitted that he could only attain orgasm by stabbing women, which made it hard for him to control his violent impulses. Various names were given to Chikatilo, including Butcher of Rostov, Red Ripper, and Rostov Ripper. He had admitted to 56 murders, 53 of which led to his trial and execution by firing squad in 1994. 10. Albert Fish. It's safe to assume that a serial killer with nicknames like the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Boogeyman is completely insane. In the early 1900s, Fish was prosecuted and convicted of raping, murdering, and eating 3 children. However, he boasted that he had children in every state and claimed to have murdered more than 100 children. Fish's letter to Grace Budd's mother, who he murdered when she was 10 years old, is particularly disturbing. The letter described the 9 days he spent luring the girl, strangling her, and then eating her body parts. 11. Joachim Kroll. Between 1955 and 1976, German serial killer Joachim Kroll killed at least 14 people, including children. Kroll would suffocate his victims with his bare hands, have sex with their bodies, and then eat them. Strangely, it was a neighbor's complaint about a clogged drain that led to Kroll's capture. Human remains had clogged the pipes. At the time of his arrest, Kroll had just started boiling the remains of his most recent victim, 4-year-old Marion Ketter. 12. Pedro Lopez. The fact that Pedro Lopez's whereabouts are unknown makes his recent killing spree all the more dangerous. The Colombian national claims to have raped and murdered more than 300 women in his native country, as well as in neighboring Ecuador and Peru. 100 of them were women from the tribe. The monster of the Andes was apprehended in 1980 after he led authorities to the graves of 53 young victims, aged 9 to 12. The Ecuadorian court convicted Lopez guilty of the murder of 110 young women. He was ruled mad after confessing to another 240 murders in Peru and Colombia. Even though Lopez was supposedly freed in 1998 for good behavior, no one knows for sure where he is at this time. These individuals are sick and dangerous. For more videos on crime stories and murder cases, give this video a like and subscribe to this channel. You can also drop your comment in the comment section below.